I sat in the courtroom, my hands resting on the smooth yet worn wooden table before me. The air was heavy, thick with tension, the kind that clings to your skin and weighs down your thoughts. I could feel the silence pressing in on me, interrupted only by the occasional shuffle of papers or the low murmur of legal aids. Across from me sat Camila, my wife, or rather, the woman who would soon no longer hold that title. She looked completely unbothered, her expression calm, confident. Her hair was styled to perfection, her gray suit sharp and tailored. Everything about her screamed composure and control. Next to her lounged her lawyer, Griffin, a man who wore smugness like a second skin. His legs were casually crossed, his hands folded over his stomach, and he wore this grin, like he was already savoring my defeat. I felt small in that moment, like the walls were closing in around me, and I was the only one who hadn't read the script. The hours dragged on as we sat through testimony, arguments, and legal jargon that blurred together into a fog. I stayed quiet, listening, waiting. Then, finally, the judge looked at me. "Mr. Rodas, do you have anything you wish to say before I make my ruling?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I reached down and pulled out a thick folder I had prepared over months. Months of quietly collecting receipts, printing emails, and organizing financial documents. I stood, walked to the bench, and handed it to the clerk, who then passed it to the judge. I glanced at Camila and Griffin as I returned to my seat. Their smugness wavered. I saw it, the first crack in their facade. Inside that folder was everything they didn't expect me to have. I had documented transactions that didn't add up, emails that hinted at hidden accounts, records of business dealings that Camila had sworn didn't exist. For too long, I had doubted myself, convinced that maybe I was just being paranoid. But now, the evidence was laid bare for all to see. As the judge flipped through the documents, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. Camila's self-assured mask began to crumble. Her jaw tightened, and her hands gripped the edge of the table just a bit too tightly. Griffin leaned over to whisper something to her, but the smugness had vanished. He looked concerned. I sat up a little straighter. That shift in the room, it was electric. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. The power that Camila had held over me, the manipulation, the lies, it was all starting to slip from her grasp. I had taken the time to understand the business we built together, to see where I'd been left in the dark. And what I found was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about a broken marriage or even a lopsided divorce. This was about betrayal on a deeper level. As I looked through our financial history, I began to see the truth. I had been used. My trust, my name, even my credit had been tools in Camila's game. She had signed my name on documents I'd never seen, moved money without my knowledge, and cleverly disguised everything behind layers of legal complexity. But her arrogance had made her careless. During my investigation, I found records that hinted at serious fraud. Shell companies, inconsistent wire transfers, partnerships that didn't add up. It all pointed to something much bigger than just a messy breakup. I started to get scared. This wasn't just about losing a house or money. This was about criminal activity, and I was unknowingly involved. Then, things escalated. One day, I got a call from someone I never expected, a junior associate from Griffin's law firm. She was nervous, her voice barely above a whisper as she told me she had information, real evidence. She had been working on Camila's documents and had stumbled upon internal emails and transaction logs that confirmed my suspicions. Camila had been laundering money through our shared business, using me as a cover. The associate agreed to submit a signed affidavit. That affidavit was the key that unlocked everything. At our final court session, I presented even more evidence. The judge's expression shifted from one of disinterest to deep concern. He reviewed the files carefully, asked pointed questions, and finally announced that the nature of the case required referral to the proper authorities. What had started as a routine divorce had now veered into criminal territory. Not long after that, the news broke. Camila was arrested, taken in for questioning about financial crimes and money laundering. The house, the accounts, Everything we had fought over was suddenly meaningless. I was awarded the house and what was left of our shared assets, but I didn't feel victorious. As the dust settled, I walked through the empty halls of our once shared home. It felt like a museum of memories, some sweet, but most bitter. There was a strange hollowness in me, a quiet space where rage and sorrow had once burned hot. I had won, yes, but at what cost? I packed a few essentials and left it all behind. I needed peace, a chance to find myself again. I drove west, with no real plan other than to escape. I ended up in a quiet coastal town, where the ocean was always within earshot and the pace of life moved gently. Here I started to heal. I found comfort in simple things: morning walks by the water, the kindness of strangers, the space to breathe without fear. I began to write, to reflect, and to remember who I was before the lies and manipulation. I had entered the courtroom as a man broken by betrayal. But through the pain and the process, I had found something I thought I'd lost: myself. And now, I'm ready to live a life that's truly mine. The days in the coastal town passed slowly, gently, like waves lapping against the shore, never in a hurry, but always moving forward. I rented a small cottage just outside the town center, tucked away behind a cluster of pine trees. It wasn't much, but it was enough. There were no tall gates, no security systems, no spotless marble floors, just wooden beams, creaky steps, and the comforting scent of sea air. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to tension or suspicion. I woke up to silence, to peace. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. The routine I'd known for years, meetings, business dinners, pretending everything was fine, was gone. I didn't miss it. But the quiet had a way of stirring up old wounds. I'd sit on the porch in the evenings, coffee in hand, and watch the sky turn gold and then violet. Sometimes the pain would sneak in with the dusk, memories of how things used to be, how they could have been if love had been enough. Camila hadn't always been cruel. There had been good times, moments of laughter and closeness that made it hard to believe how things ended. But I had to remind myself, love without respect is just a pretty prison. And I had been locked inside it for far too long. In the quiet, I began to reflect more deeply. I wrote in a journal every morning, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I wrote about the betrayal, the lies, the courtroom, the fear. But I also wrote about hope, about the sense of clarity that had begun to grow in me. I started hiking through nearby trails, letting nature pull the noise from my mind. I met a few locals, kind, unassuming people who asked no questions and offered no judgment. Just company, just kindness. One day, I walked into a small bookstore at the edge of town. The owner, a woman in her 50s named Elise, had an easy smile and a soft voice. We talked about books, about solitude, and eventually about pain. Not in detail, but she understood. She had known her own heartbreak. Over time, we became friends. Real friends. The kind that didn't need to impress or explain. Sometimes we'd sit in her shop after hours, sharing tea and stories. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't about that. It was about being seen without being judged. Slowly, I felt myself changing. I wasn't the man who had sat trembling in that courtroom, nor the man who had allowed himself to be overshadowed for years. I was someone new. Someone rebuilt. I didn't have all the answers, but I had questions again. I had curiosity. I had dreams. I started painting. Badly at first, then with more confidence. There was something healing about putting color to canvas. No rules, no expectations. Just emotion made visible. My small living room became a gallery of messy, imperfect pieces, but each one told a story only I could understand. I didn't know what the future held, and for once, that didn't terrify me. I didn't need to control it. I didn't need to fight it. All I needed to do was keep moving forward, step by step, breath by breath. Camila's name stopped echoing in my head. The anger faded. Not because I forgave her, but because I no longer carried the weight of her choices. Her downfall had been hers to face, and I had faced enough of it on my own. I let it go, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. One morning, months after I arrived, I stood by the ocean and realized something simple, something profound. I was free. Not just legally, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I was free from the lies, from the manipulation, from the version of myself who had once believed he wasn't enough. That day, I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just smiled, deeply, peacefully, because I knew I had survived the storm. And more than that, I had found the shore. This is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. A beginning written not in the shadow of someone else's ambitions, but in the light of my own truth. For the first time in years, I am living not out of fear, but out of choice. And that choice is mine.